Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton Agenda AWANI dan saya ingin meminta izin berbicara bahasa Inggeris kerana malam ini kita ingin melihat ke arah APEC. And for APEC, we want this particular piece of content to be shared not only among 21st economies of the world but even beyond that. And I'm very, very honored because I've not seen this amazing Malaysian for the longest time. And today, I'm so proud that she'll be online in the new normal, as you all know. That's how we do it nowadays. Tan Sri Dato' Rebecca Fatima Stamaria, she's also a doctor at that. So she's the first female executive director of the APEC Secretariat, now based in Singapore. I think it was only until 2010 where it was revolving according to the country that was the secretariat, but then it was according to perlantikan, as we all know. And now a very deserving executive director. You know, if you Google her, they say a breath of fresh air. That was in 2018. So now that we are faced, and Malaysia is now the chair for this year, I want to get the wisdom from Tan Sri at one of the best position groupings to help us, as in more than one country, as a group, to win over the virus and to triumph over the public and economic cost that it has greatly impacted is APEC, because no one community can survive the pandemic alone because it doesn't discriminate, and even if your country is safe, other countries are not, it will always be a reinfection, and who do you trade with? So based on that, Tan Sri, if you can give us way positive hope of how, as a grouping, APEC can help not only Malaysia but the other 20 economies around the world to really have a better footing moving forward.
Thank you very much, Kamarul. Pleasure to see you and talk to you again. Just to inform you that APEC has, despite the pandemic, APEC's work this year has continued. And Malaysia, as chair of APEC, has been doing a very good job in bringing all the parties together, all the economies together, and keeping the momentum, despite the challenges of the pandemic, despite not being able to have face-to-face meetings. So Malaysia, this is the first time APEC is doing all its meeting online. We had the first meeting face-to-face in February in Putrajaya. Then, APEC hit us all in a big way. So we've had to recalibrate and go back to the drawing board and see how we can manage this, because, especially in a time like this, challenging time like this, you need to work together. And so Malaysia, to be, very fair and to commend Malaysia for having worked to do the meetings online. In fact, the first group that went online was the tourism working group. And that was really fantastic, and was Malaysia's initiative. So kudos to Malaysia and to the Ministry of Tourism for having done that, because they chaired the meeting and they chaired it very well. It was a working level, but it was well done, and it set the pace for all the subsequent meetings. Coming back to your question on what we're doing together, I must say that, to understand that this is an economic body, and we are a non-binding voluntary organization. So for us, the most important thing is to ensure that the lines of communications open and to share information and policy initiatives on what each of us is doing, so that we learn from each other on how we're going to manage this pandemic. And that's on one side. On another, which is also the raison d'etre of APEC, is keeping markets open. So that too, we've engaged each other to ensure that, yes, the WTO, the World Trade Organization rules allow us to take measures during emergencies. But it's important that we make sure that the measures that we take are temporary, just to deal and proportionate to deal with the emergency. And then going forward, we must make sure that we keep the markets open. We are transparent in everything that we do. So that's where we're at.
Yeah. Tan Sri, you've made the point how this is unprecedented, and after just one face-to-face meeting, everything else had to go online, had to do digital. Many, I'm sure it was among the first time to really talk about very important issues only online without being able to have that comfort and close proximity. However, if we look at the other industries or areas among the APEC member economies, if I Google, have already also spoken about how crucial the small and medium enterprises are. In fact, they're the majority mover of initiatives of trade and also for goods and services to move. However, if we take the example of Malaysia, maybe a few other countries, it's not as easy for the SMEs to move into digital. What COVID has done, as I take what has been said by WHO, it's not sometimes creating anything new, but making what the divisions of before even more starkly exposed. So if public health was bad before, it become worse now. It was good before, it might be challenged now. So the same thing for digital adoption and also trade. You know, we were moving towards digital, but it's not harmonized across all segments of the supply chain, for example. So if you can help shine the light on the small and medium enterprises as one of the windows to look at how APEC can really make a difference to make our economies better.
Yep. Thank you for bringing up the point. In fact, one of the key areas for APEC is inclusive growth. And we realized that the SMEs and specifically women-owned and women-led SMEs or MSMEs, micro, small and medium enterprises, were badly affected by the pandemic. So we had our group meeting, the small and medium enterprises working group, the policy partnership on women empowerment and women in the economy working group also meeting to see how we can learn from each other, because you know the point of APEC is really how we support each other, how we learn from each other, and what are the policies that different economies, what are the measures different economies have put in place to support the SMEs or women-led organizations. And so those meetings that we had really helped us to chart the course, to focus the work that we're doing for supporting SMEs and women-led SMEs or women-owned SMEs. Also, a very strong focus on the digital economy, specifically looking at our policies and infrastructure and data flows. All these areas very important for us. If we just talk about the rhetoric is there, but what important is the political will to ensure that whatever we do, foremost in our minds is how do you benefit the small and medium enterprises. How do you benefit women in the economy? So those are areas that intense discussions are going on. A lot of information sharing, a lot of sharing of best practices. Because at the end of the day, you take the learnings from each of the member economies and you run with it. Like I said earlier, APEC is a non-binding forum. We share a lot of experience and best practices. We don't go down the road of doing agreements like ASEAN. We don't do agreements. But what we do, and which is more important and equally important, I think, is the sharing of policies and measures. So learning from each other's best practice and mistakes as well. And how we support each other. So those are important measures.
Tan Sri, we hear about new norms, new normal, norma baharu, is being said more and more. But sometimes the realization of it is a bit slower when it comes to getting it done. But what has given you hope based on all this data and this collaborative effort among the 21 economies or even beyond that will really put us on top of the current pandemic right now? Because as we all know, it's not just about public health. In order to curtail infection among the community, the first lockdown, for example, done in Malaysia, saw it being really effective. But our economy suffered greatly because of that livelihood. So to balance public health and livelihood, we need all the data that we can, we need all the learnings that we can, and I think it's a God-given blessing that among the case studies in the APEC economies are economies that has done very, very well on the global scale at that to really manage both the threat to public health and economy. So if you can take one or two key points that you have seen through this collaborative data partnership and knowledge sharing that we can use as a stepping stone to the future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work that's being done by the different economies, the different member economies, and some have really excelled. If you look at, I'm not going to mention specifics, but some have really done very well. And those models have been shared at the ministerial level when we had the ministers who look after SMEs meeting, when we had the high-level dialogue for women in the economy as well. So those economies which were very successful, they shared their models with the rest of the grouping. And, so those are lessons, they're very practical lessons on how they manage this. So, but very importantly, what came through this was the fact that no country can go it alone. No economy can go it alone. It's really about working collaboratively. What the pandemic has shown us is the importance of cooperation, international cooperation. You can't do this alone. And really, when we're talking of trade and exporting and importing, what's important here is also regulations at the border. If you say you want to open up your markets, you want to make sure that essential goods and services flow, and that was one of our focus areas, to ensure that medical devices and food and essentials flow during this pandemic. But if yes, you say flow, but when it gets to the border, it gets stuck because of some regulations, customs and all that. So that's pointless, right? You don't get the seamless flow. And that's one area that APEC has been focusing on, to ensure the seamless flow of goods and services, especially those essentials. The other thing that we've also done, and this is done by our policy support unit, we've done the research and we shared this with the members to say, look, your tariffs are pretty low for a number of these essentials, but for some of the essentials which we require during this pandemic, your tariffs are high. So really, the research surfaces this sort of data so that the policymakers can realize, oops, we need this stuff. So we need to work with bring down our tariffs to manage this pandemic. So these are the kinds of things that we've been doing over the last few months. In fact, the moment we noticed that economies had gone into lockdown, our policy support unit started the research to look at those products that we need, the essential goods that we need, and what's the movement, what kind of restrictions do we have on the movement of these products and essential goods. So sharing that was really putting that in the front and sharing that with the policymakers was so important.
Tan Sri, I just couldn't resist because right now a lot of people are hoping that 2021 will actually see a viable vaccine out there in the market. But the word COVID, vaccine and market also carries a lot of discussions, discourse and debate, because who will get it first, who will be able to afford it. And if we look at the Malaysia national budget, for example, I don't have the vantage point like you to look at the whole region and 21 economies. So if I take our own country, there's billions being earmarked, kept aside for vaccine procurement and all that stuff. But wouldn't APEC be one of the best grouping or platform, if I can deem it as such, to actually work that around the 21 member economies? Because it's going to be a huge, huge cost for even the most developed of nations. And there's no guarantee because this is unprecedented. So was there a specific discussion that can give a bit of ray of light to the people of these 21 economies as far as COVID vaccine is concerned?
Well, we're still in early days when it comes to this. There is a lot of research going on. Different groups are doing this. What we have is our health working group also has this discussion. And like I said, the value of APEC is how they get together and share this information. And at this stage is that kind of sharing, which is important, sharing the research, sharing the data among the relevant people, the experts. We have, like I said, the health working group, they comprise all the experts. So we depend on them to advise the policymakers. So that is the value of that we bring to this pandemic, to help us work through the initiatives. How do you make decisions that are informed? So to make informed decisions, you need your experts. And in this context, then those of us from the economic side, we depend on our health experts to advise us.
Yeah. Among the areas focused, apart from digital SMEs and important materials like PPE and ventilators, the first time Malaysia had never had a pandemic like this before, maybe as compared to some other economies, but it was the essential goods that were off the shelves and people were panic buying. And if we can imagine the supply chain of trade also being interrupted, how do you see food security, for example, as being one of the key areas being focused at to ensure that everyone is not over panicking and not hoarding, and the borders are still open, the supply chain for food security, for example, is imperative to be kept open?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned this because food security has been on our radar for the longest time. We've had the food security public policy partnership group regularly having their discussions. And this year also, I must say again, I must commend Malaysia's leadership in this area. They were co-chairing the committee that looked at food security, and using the data that we provided, our policy support unit provided the data about supply chains and how to manage those supply chains in this crucial time, and also the sharing of how we manage this. For example, if you look at how Malaysia, Singapore have managed keeping the supply chain for essential goods open, it is novel, and so that kind of sharing is important. We've done it quite well to make sure that there's the constant supply of essentials. I remember in the early days of the lockdown, you couldn't get basic things like flour because everybody was home and baking. So I mean, but it was good to see that the supply came back quite fast because of the collaboration. And I go back to the whole idea of, no, you can't do this alone. You can't go it alone. It's in the area of the vaccine research and development, whether it's in supply chains for essential goods. You cannot go it alone, So that's the strength that we bring to the table to ensure that we keep the conversation going and to make sure that all of us are aware of where we're at in this pandemic.
Tan Sri, we miss you very, very much, and we hope you can come down and visit us or come up and visit us in KL. But we look at things like reciprocal green lane, for example, that has been going on quite well. So if we look at other examples in the Oceania region, when we look at Australia and New Zealand, they have sort of a green bubble lane. Even sports like rugby can be played. Team from New Zealand can fly to Australia and vice versa. So are we looking at that kind of model moving forward? Because you alluded to the fact that Malaysia hosted a very interesting and important discussion on tourism, for example. And tourism is one of the sectors of the world that is very hardly hit on this airlines are not flying much, except for domestic maybe, or some international. Thousands of crew members are either laid off and stuff like that. So when tourism, if it comes back, it must come back in the new normal while waiting for the vaccine to finally be available for everyone. Was this also one of the key discussions within the APEC community?
Yeah, you know, the new normal, as you say, will be very different. And tourism was badly, or is badly affected. Is that sector that's one of the sectors that's badly affected. And if you look at the hospitality sector, the food and beverage sectors that's connected with the whole tourism ecosystem, for me, my concern also is women, because women are more likely to be employed in the front-facing, the customer-facing service. And so it is important that we look at how we can open back economies to tourism. We've had discussions, like I said, the first meeting was with the tourism working group. They talk of travel bubbles. Even then, they talk of travel bubbles, and you'll see them. There are experiments going around. It's important to get the health protocols in place, ensuring that you don't jeopardize, health at the expense of tourism. But also, this is an opportunity for us to look at how we can work together with when I say us, means the public sector, policymakers working with the private sector to see how we can come back stronger. What kind of capacity building do we need to put in place for our tourism folks? For example, Malaysia is quite advanced in its homestay, but homestay, you need to build back trust, into the system. So how do you work with the medical side, with the health side, to ensure that certain protocols are in place? People have the confidence of going back to use homestay. And I think also with the pandemic, people's focus on how they experience tourism will be different. Staycations, even staycation call for different models of building trust again. So how do we work with the homestay folks, the communities, to ensure that the health protocols are in place, so there's confidence to have domestic tourism come back. Those are things. Also, this is the time for governments to invest in upskilling, reskilling the tourism sector. Think about sustainability things. Now, folks are all into the sustainability, green tourism. How do we build that in so that when we open our market, we have new selling points? So those are things that those are discussions that are going on. But even at the domestic level, economies need to engage with their business community, with international bodies like Airbnb, to see how we can really have that collaboration to prepare us for the opening up.
Having asked all that, Tan Sri, I can't let you go without asking you about the upcoming leaders meeting. And people like me who have been around for quite some time knows that for a few times before, we didn't have a leaders declaration at that. A lot of factors before, whether unplanned or otherwise. There's even the trade war before between China and US, and now the political leadership is going to change for next year in the US. So what can we expect at the upcoming leaders meeting, and what would be, if there's a declaration, would be icing on the cake for a job well done by Malaysia as chair? And maybe you can couple that with the hope for APEC moving forward.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a very important year going forward. With all the challenges, the fact that we're going to have a virtual leaders meeting, so it will be a different form. And very, very interesting for all of us. We're setting the standard, as it were, for a leaders virtual meeting for APEC. And next year, New Zealand has decided all their meetings will be virtual. So we are setting, in a sense, a standard for New Zealand to take forward. And very important also, this year sees the culmination of the BOGO goals for free and open trade in the Asia Pacific. And I just came up from the drafting session. We're working on the new vision for APEC going forward, and that we hope to have during the leaders meeting. So a major takeaway, not just a declaration, but also the articulation of the new vision for APEC going forward. So very exciting time for all of us, and working very hard. Malaysia's in the driver's seat, doing a good job to ensure that we have not just the declaration, but also the new vision for APEC.
Tan Sri, I'm going to force you to promise me that if ever you get to use your passport through that green bubble line that we have in reciprocal green lane, you will come to the studio. Of course, we all SOPs adhered to, and it's good to have you again to explain about this, because I think the vision for APEC moving forward is important. It should no longer just be among the few that knows about it, but the young people of Asia Pacific, essentially, the majority, they should be burning with passion for this. And I think you're the best person to talk about this, not as a Malaysian, but as the first lady executive director of the APEC Secretariat based in Singapore. And just like Kamala Harris now, following your footsteps, put it in that way. So I'm sure a lot of trailblazing is going to happen. Thank you so much, Tan Sri. We'll catch you, very soon again. Thank you so much.
Lagi. Ya, terima kasih.
InsyaAllah. Sama-sama. Dan itu adalah temu bual bersama dengan Tan Sri Dr. Rebecca Fatima Maria, dan beliau kini berpusat ataupun berpengkalan di Singapura sebagai pengarah eksekutif untuk Sekretariat APEC, dan semakin Malaysia menuju ke penghujung sebagai host untuk tahun ini dengan norma barunya, kita mendapat semakin banyak sinar untuk melihat ke depan dan maju sebagai komuniti Asia Pasifik. Sekian, selamat malam, terima kasih. InsyaAllah kita jumpa lagi.